Howdy folks. Hey, so this video is for people who are scared of two words, API and JSON. So look, here's what happens. A lot of non-technical people like me and lots of other people out there, we want to build cool solutions. We really want to venture out of the box realm and extend our solution with like fancy things. But in many cases that requires us to connect to some like external source, which means that we have to use an API, and somehow like a JSON file is involved in that process. And then we hear all these words and we go, screw it, this is beyond my intellectual capabilities. I'm not even going to venture in that direction. And I've been like that for a long time, especially, and I've been scared of like APIs and things like that. But like I've been reading about it. I've been like dealing with APIs a little bit to some extent, and I must say that my fear has diminished just a bit, and I'm a lot more comfortable than I was, fairly recently. What I'm trying to say is that even though they sound scary, they really are not, especially in some very simple scenarios. So this video is all about how to use API and JSON files and use that information that they bring and surface them in like a PowerApps app, right? So what we look at is basically we'll use an API in a flow that'll be connected to a PowerApps app. And the example that we'll go with is a fairly common example that we hear about. It's a common request, which is updating exchange rates on an automatic basis, right? So we don't want to do it manually. We want to keep exchange rates updated on their own. Very helpful, very valid if you are a business that deals with in multiple countries, multiple currencies, etc. So in those cases, you do want exchange rates to be updated, perhaps on a daily basis. So before we begin, just a few basics here, right? So now if you Google exchange rate API, you will find a few options, and one of those options is this right here, exchange rates API.io. And if you go there, you will see that, so basically it's a URL, right? So an API is essentially a URL, and it looks something like this, right? And in many cases, you will also have like, you can add certain like extra parameters to get very specific information. But if you look at this one right here, for example, you will see that this URL gives you the latest foreign exchange reference rates. It's as simple as that. So now if you go here, which is right here. So if you go to that URL, you basically get a list of exchange rates for all these different currencies, right? So your base currency is euro right here, and 1 euro equals this much in all these different currencies. So now this is a JSON file, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just a list. It's a list of items, so it's a list of items that are giving you very specific information. In this case, it happens to be exchange rates. So, and now this API right here is very open, right? So it's not really asking for any API key. You just go to this URL and it gives you information. Now there are other APIs as well. So for example, this one, Fixer, right? So Fixer wants you to sign up for the service. It's not as open because they want you to use an API key when you use their service. So when you go through this process, so you just like, you say sign up, you can go with the free version, and oh, I'm already signed in, so never mind. So if you go through this option, so it'll say, hey, register for an API key, and then it makes you just fill up your name, email, etc. And then it gives you a key, right? And then using that key, you can actually, so this is my key right here, and that's the URL. So the whole thing will give me something very similar to what we saw earlier, right? So again, it's just base currency is euro. On this date, the exchange rates for these currencies are these values, right? Again, it's very simple. This one happens to be a much larger list. It's covering a lot more currencies than the previous one. But conceptually, it generates a JSON file, which is basically a list of items. Now, we will use this in a flow to surface this information in a PowerApps app. Okay, so if I go into my flow here, I'm gonna get rid of that because I was screwing around earlier with something else. So go into my flows and I'll start from scratch. Okay, so create from blank. So we want this flow to trigger from PowerApps, right? So we'll go with our generic PowerApps trigger. And our next step would be to get information using that API. Okay, so for that, we will use the HTTP action right here. Okay, the method is get because we are getting information, right? And the URI is the URL, this one right here. And where did it go? Okay, so we paste that right here. You can ignore the rest of the fields. So now what happens is when we get information from this URL, it's going to give us information in the form of a JSON file. And what we need to do is we need to parse that JSON. Okay, so essentially we're telling Flow that, look, this is the JSON file. It's bringing in certain information that's in the body of the content. And then, you know, you would also want to let Flow know the format of the JSON file. Okay, and the format is basically this right here. So all of this. So we can just, you know, copy this, go back to our flow, and what you would want to do is click this option, use sample payload to generate schema. You click it, and this is where you paste your example JSON. And when you click done, Flow just kind of nicely formats it. And when it looks at the sample, what you just pasted, it knows that it's expecting some values of certain data types, right? So for example, if you look at the currencies, it knows that it's expecting number values for those exchange rates. Okay, so now that we have the parse JSON step, the next step is to create a response that will be consumed by PowerApps. Okay, so we'll go with the response step, and which is this right here. Okay, and here we will say, okay, so what's the PowerApps is, you know, what's being worked on right here in this step. So you can see now that it does identify that the JSON file has all these different items, which are essentially exchange rates for all those different currencies. So either you can use any of these specific ones, or you can just go with body. But, you know, in case you want to use many currencies, you can just go with body. And then do some manipulations in PowerApps to get specific values. Here as well, make sure to click the advanced options, and, you know, just type just paste the JSON format here again. Okay, so click the use sample payload to generate schema and paste your example JSON, and then it does the same thing here as well. That's it. Now let's give it a name. So we'll call it flow video for exchange rates. Okay, and save it. All right, so now let's go into our PowerApps. So here I have a blank screen, and what I'll do is I will create a button just to show how this works. So, and we will associate this button with the flow that we just created. So if I go into actions and I go to flow, and I call it flow video for exchange rates right here. Okay, gonna click it, and it's going to add it to the button here in a second. All right, so now to run this flow, all it takes is this. But what we would want to do is we would want to add the values of this flow, or add the results of this flow in a collection, because we want to keep using it again and again. So let's do a clear collect Ah, damn it. Okay, never mind. And we'll give it a name. We'll call it rates for us. Okay, and then we can just manually type the flow video exchange rates.run. That's what we want, right? Okay, so there's that. Now let's do something really quickly. Let's click this button. Let's just run this flow once to see what it does. Okay, so now that it has run, we should see a few things in the rates for us collection. So if I go into my collections, so see now how our rates has these values. Okay, so base, the date, rates, and a few other things. Where is this coming from? All of this is coming from the JSON file. So if you look at the JSON file here, so see how it says success, timestamp, base, date, rates, all of that. And within rates, you have this huge list of exchange rates, right? So even here, if I look at if I click this table right here for rates, it's going to give me all those values. Okay, so now what this means is that we have successfully received all the exchange rates from that API through that JSON file by using Flow into our PowerApps. Sounded complicated, but it isn't. You saw that, right? So just to show you, what we'll do here is let's insert a label. Okay, so our base currency is euro. And the reason why it's euro is because this fixer.io, the free version of it, doesn't let you change the base currency. If you pay for it, it will let you change it. Anyway, so what we'll do here is, what did we name our rates for us? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll display some values from the rates for us collection here. So what I'll say is, I want from the first row, I want rates for us. Okay, now see how from that collection we can get the rates. Okay, and then let's do Canadian dollars. Okay, so there you go. So that's a number right there. So €1 is 1.5 Canadian dollars. So now that we have this, we can use this in our app. So to give you an example, so let's add an image gallery or an image real quick. Okay, so let's say we're creating an app where we are selling photos. Okay, so I can just go in here and look at, let me just add a few, maybe one photo, whatever. Here, let's go with this. Okay, so let's say, we want to sell this photo. So this photo costs we'll go with €50, right? Now, how much does it cost in Canadian dollars? Let's find out. So if we add another label, so we'll just say 50 times, what's our label with this one? Label 2. Okay, so 50 times label 2, $75.3, right? So what's really happening here is that we brought in exchange rates from somewhere else, which had, so this other source has its own API. It's essentially just a URL, and using this URL, we get all the exchange rates in this format, and then in this JSON format, which we use in our flow, right? So we get the values from the HTTP step, parse the JSON file, send the response to PowerApps. And when we send the response to PowerApps, this is what we get, right? So through the flow that and you can use this flow in any way you want, in your, like maybe in the app area or on visible of your screen or whatever, right? Use it creatively as and when required. But essentially you're getting this, so this is what you're getting, and you're getting all sorts of exchange rates. And for your international audience, you are basically telling them, hey, if you are wanting to pay in euros, it's 50. If you're paying in Canadian dollars, it's this much. And this calculation is what's really important, because you don't want to do this manually, because exchange rates fluctuate all the time. So you would want to have the most up-to-date exchange rate to make the most revenue. Anyway, so hopefully this helped. Thank you for watching. If you have questions, please post them in the comments below. Bye bye.